Namo Namaha and welcome back. Now, in this segment, I wanted to basically just do two things. First, I thought we could take a kind of bird's eye view of this text that we're going to be working through this week, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Then I thought we could just basically read a few bits and bobs from the first chapter and see what we find. Right? So first of all, it's important to know that we don't really know a whole lot about the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. For example, we can only guess, really, that he lived sometime between 325 to 425 AD. It's just a guess. We don't really know for sure. We also don't know where he lived. Some people say he was from the south. Some people think he might be from Kashmir. There's actually another Patanjali who was a grammarian from Kashmir, but it's probably that was a different Patanjali. Again, we don't really know for sure. We don't really know much about Patanjali at all. All we really have are his Yoga Sutras. The text itself consists of 195 short aphoristic sentences called sutras, which literally means threads in Sanskrit. Most of them are really, really condensed sentences that don't make a whole lot of sense on their own. You have to have a commentary, an explanation that goes along with them. This explanation is called a bhashya. And all ancient philosophical and scientific traditions in India followed a kind of sutra bhashya format where you had tightly woven threads, these sutras that students have to memorize, and then they're accompanied by basically lecture notes that their teachers provide them in order to learn what the sutras actually mean. The current scholarly thinking is that Patanjali wrote his own bhashya, his own commentary, at the same time as the sutras, these aphorisms. Beyond the sutra and the bhashya, there's also many other later commentaries on the Yoga Sutras, but written by other authors because the sutra served as a kind of foundational text for the entire school of classical yoga. Anyway, the purpose of the Yoga Sutras, Miller explains on page 18, is to be a practical means for realizing spiritual perfection through distinct modes of discipline. It's divided into 4 sections, and these 4 sections kind of lead you through the discipline of yoga. The first section is called Samadhi Pada, the absorption section, and it talks about what it means to have a cessation of thought, to cultivate a state of pure contemplation or absorption. We'll look at a few of these sutras here in a minute. The second section, which is the one I'd like to look at in our live session, is called the Sadhana Pada, the section on practice, and it outlines these 8 limbs of yoga practice, the Ashtanga Yoga. That's where that name of that yoga school comes from. These 8 limbs proceed step by step. Each one is harder than the previous one, more advanced. First, there's the 5 moral principles that you have to follow, called the yamas, which is not lying, not stealing, no violence, not being greedy, not having sex. Then there's the 5 observances that you have to keep, which are called the niyamas, in order to kind of keep a clean, content, austere, smart, and humble self. After the yamas and niyamas, then you have the postures, the asanas that you get into in order to exert control over your physical body and senses. Then you have pranayama, breath control. Then once you've mastered these, the next step is to slowly start withdrawing your senses from the material world. It's called pratyahara in Sanskrit. This is what turtles do with their limbs. This leads to a state of mental concentration, dharana, where you can bring your thoughts under control. Once you're able to control your body, breath, senses, and mind, then you can start looking at your intellect, stilling it through meditation, dhyana. Finally, at the highest level, you enter the states of pure contemplation, absorption, samadhi, in order to arrive at that final state of pure self-realization, ultimate freedom. This state is called kaivalya, singularity, basically. It's the state where your true self, your purusha, your transcendent spirit is fully isolated from your material self. The third section is called the Vibhuti Pada, the powers section. Here's the focus is on the kinds of extraordinary worldly powers that you can get along the way when you're doing yoga. These are things like knowing your past lives, knowing the thoughts of other people, changing your size and shape, entering into other people's bodies, being able to talk to animals and birds, other kinds of supernatural stuff like that. Finally, the fourth section is called the Kaivalya Pada, the isolation section, in which Patanjali outlines what the ultimate goal of yoga is supposed to be, this absolute spiritual freedom, solitude, kaivalya, that you get to reach when you reach that highest state of spiritual attainment. A lot more to talk about of all of these Yoga Sutras, like many of others that have come before you. Maybe if you start reading through the text, maybe you might get hooked on Patanjali. Maybe he'll never leave you, never leave your yoga practice. But to get us started, I thought it might be fun to walk through a few sutras from the first book to hear what they sound like in Sanskrit, see what they might mean. Here's how they begin. Om Atha Yoganushasanam. This is the teachings of yoga. Here's the second sutra. This is the big important one. Yogaschitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is the cessation of the turnings of thought. In other words, you have to be able to kind of block or prevent all of those random thoughts that you're always having, whether it's sensing the world around you, seeing, tasting, touching, hearing, smelling. Maybe it's feeling stuff, impulses, desires, fears, thinking random thoughts that just pop into your head. Yoga is the methods of how to control those, how to be able to hold back your thoughts when you need to. The sutra is kind of also like a keystone for the whole text. If you memorize it, you'll basically have the whole text in your head. Yogaschitta vritti nirodha. Here's sutras 3 and 4, which actually follow on to number 2. They help you get to understand what you get when you do yoga. Tada drashtu swarupe vasthanam vritti sarupyam itaratra. When thought ceases, the spirit stands in its true identity as observer to the world. Otherwise, the observer identifies with the turnings of thought. Literally, the idea here is that when you do what Sutra number 2 tells you to do, Chitta Vritti Nirodha, the cessation of the movement of thought, then you get a situation where the spirit, the Purusha, which is the true observer in the world, that's lying there inside you, hidden, awakens. It attains its true identity, its Swarupa. Ordinarily, Itaratra, we don't see it as being any different than our usual material selves. We actually are ignorant of it. So if I'm looking at you through this camera, for example, it's my material self that's looking at the camera, not my true transcendent self, the spirit, the Purusha that's lying somewhere inside me unrecognized. To get a realization of that self, I first have to be able to restrict and control the constant activities of my thinking faculties, my chitta. Now, what are these activities that my chitta is always getting itself into? Patanjali explains this next. Vrittayaha panchatayah klishtaha pramana viparyaya vikalpa nidra smritayah. The turnings of thought, whether corrupted or immune to the forces of corruption, are of 5 kinds. Valid judgment, error, conceptualization, sleep, memory. This is what our minds are doing all the time. We're judging the world around us validly, mistakenly. We're imagining new things, vikalpa, like unicorns or beer yoga. We're asleep. But our minds, they're still going. They're still moving. We retain memories that are buried deep in our thoughts, in our chitta. The next few sutras, 7 to 11, let's skip through. They outline the different kinds of chitta vrittis, turnings of thought. It's important, actually, this section for understanding yoga epistemology, the ways that yoga philosophy establishes what counts as valid knowledge, what's false knowledge. 12 through 16 are important, though, because they outline what you're supposed to be doing when you're doing yoga. When you're doing chitta vritti nirodha, right? The cessation of the turning of thought. Here's Sutra 12. Abhyasa vairagyabhyam tanirodha. Cessation of the turnings of thought comes through practice and dispassion. Abhyasa vairagya. Practice means repetition, developing the habits of doing the same things over and over again. The 8 different aspects, the angas of yoga, which we're going to find out in section 2, right? Patanjali explains in 14 that this practice is firmly grounded when it's performed for a long time without interruption and with zeal. Dispassion, on the other hand, is learning to have a detachment from the things that we're usually attracted to, that we're addicted to, that we crave, that we can't let go of. In 16, he explains that higher dispassion is a total absence of craving for anything material. And this comes through a discrimination of spirit from nature. There's a lot more to talk about, of course. I wanted to close with a kind of interesting set of passages in this first book, which get at the question of who this Ishwara is supposed to be in yoga. The Lord of Yoga is how Barbara Stoller Miller translates it. This happens in Sutras 23 to 28. They're important to look at if you were interested in the kind of religious aspects of the yoga philosophy, this world of yoga. 23 goes like this. Ishwara pranidhanadva. This means cessation of thought may also come from the dedication to the Lord of Yoga, to Ishwara. Then you get Klesha karma vipakashayair aparamrushtaha purusha vishesha Ishwaraha. The Lord of Yoga is a distinct form of the spirit of Purusha, unaffected by the forces of corruption, kleshas in Sanskrit, by actions, karma, by the fruit of action, vipaka, by subliminal intent, by ashayas. In the Lord of Yoga is the incomparable seed of omniscience. Tatra niratishayam sarvajna bijam. Being unconditioned by time, he's the teacher of even the ancient teachers. Purvesham api guruhu kalena navachedat. In other words, the Ishwara is like the super guru, the primordial guru of all gurus. He's also, his sound is that reverberating syllable Om. Tasya vachakaha pranavaha. Pranava is the Sanskrit name for the syllable Om. Also this Omkara you might have heard of. What good is this mystical syllable Om? Well, 28 tells us, Tajjapas tadartha bhavanam. The repetition of the syllable reveals its meaning. So there you go, a little taste maybe of the Yoga Sutras and how they were composed back in the 300s or 400s AD, and how they outlined the basic principles of that classical Hindu school of yoga philosophy. Yoga with a capital Y, in which the basic idea is to realize the true nature of the supreme spirit, the Purusha, that's coursing through your body, through my body, by stopping the turnings of the mind, through Chitta Vritti Nirodha. And the Ishwara that's also there, that's accessible through chanting the syllable Om that helps us get there. Whether you take this Ishwara to be God, Vishnu, primordial Guru, a kind of abstracted origin point of yoga knowledge itself. Meditating on the Om syllable unlocks the meaning of the Ishvara, helps you get on your way to reaching that site of total and ultimate freedom, Kaivalya. So good luck in your own efforts at doing this kind of yoga. Let me see if you succeed. Let me know if you succeed in acquiring any extraordinary powers, any vibhutis. That'd be really cool if you did. In the meantime, thank you for watching. Stay tuned for next week as we explore how yoga and meditation were formulated also in the Buddhist traditions before Patanjali's yoga, side by side with Patanjali's Yoga Sutras of Patanjali Pada.